Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so I caught wind that Dave Smith has escalated his turn against Trump after loudly advocating for him in the 2024 election. I saw this from the Vanguard, so shout out to them. But he, a couple days ago, after the start of Donald Trump's war in Iran, Dave Smith came out and said not only did he make a mistake voting for Donald Trump or that he no longer supports him, but that we would have been better off with the Democratic options. So that's the main change in what he said. He has said before that he's renounced his support for Donald Trump. He doesn't like him anymore. Trump lied and isn't doing what he wanted him to do, so this isn't what he voted for. But now is the first time that he has said we actually would have been better off with Kamala Harris, which is a noted shift because there's a lot of sentiment when it comes to Democrats in general that their brand is so bad that it kind of doesn't matter how bad things get, because the fact that you could always say we don't know that Kamala Harris would have been better is an indictment in and of itself, even though it's not always necessarily true. So to see a guy like Dave Smith saying specifically on the issue of war and starting new wars like this war with Iran that he thinks Kamala Harris would have been better on that is very telling, because people's vision of Democrats being warmongers is so strong and the visual is so strong that in almost all cases, you can imagine a person just saying, well, Kamala Harris still would have been worse. I hear that all the time. So maybe we're seeing a genuine shift on that. It's interesting to see it coming from at least this voice on the right before any other. However, I don't want to give Dave Smith too much credit. I think he's right on this, but I think that the fact that he came to that conclusion, his way of coming to that conclusion, and also his general cultural opinion, which is the same exact opinion that led to Donald Trump in the first place, is, I think, really what's to blame for all of this. So that's mainly the point that I want to get to here. So here's Dave Smith on Trump and Iran and the mistake of voting for him.
What can you say here? You've got, just call it what it is, a war of aggression, a war of choice on behalf of a country sold off pure lies. That's where Donald Trump has gotten us. And this is a time right now for all of the goddamn people to, especially on the right, especially the people who have been supporting Trump. There's no riding the fence on this one, man. Like what I just said. Can anyone argue with what I just said? That this is a war of choice, a war of aggression, sold off lies? Okay. Well, if that's the case, and the guy's whole fucking, political career, he's been saying how stupid these regime change wars are, and then he's now embarked on the stupidest one yet. Fuck this guy. But the people giving me shit for voting for Donald Trump, I don't care about any of you. It's just incredibly stupid. I've never been as petty as any of these people. There was never one time when a leftist was against Israel genociding the people of Gaza that I went, but you voted for John McCain and therefore you're responsible for this. So like, all you guys giving me shit for that, fuck you very much. I don't care. Voting is stupid and gay. It doesn't matter. It's all a fake fucking thing. I made a mistake. I kind of thought, given the calculation of everything, I think Trump's preferable to Kamala Harris. But I do want to be clear about this. I did always say this was the biggest concern, was that Donald Trump would take us to war in Iran. And just to be very clear about this, because I've already said it before and I'm not planning on saying it much more, I was wrong to support Donald Trump. That was a big mistake. He's worse. We'd be better off with Kamala Harris. We'd be better off with Joe Biden. He's worse than the Democrats. And I say that as someone who prosecuted the case against the Democrats better than most. Who actually, despite, someone like Ben Shapiro or something like that, what? He was telling you to get the jab. He was celebrating lockdowns. He wasn't us. He didn't actually oppose the Democrats in the way that we do. And Donald Trump's worse than them. Fuck him. Fuck the Trump administration. But anyway, just wanted to get that out.
So he's being really petulant about it there, being like, I don't even care, voting's gay and blah, blah, blah. You guys are also mean for calling me out for the person I voted for. And he says this thing about John McCain, like, oh, I never said somebody who opposes the genocide in Gaza, it's your fault because you voted for John McCain. I assume he's talking about Joe Biden there, saying he's never rubbed that in anybody's face when they were complaining about the genocide in Gaza. And that's like, there's, I guess, some overlap there because a lot of people did vote for Joe Biden in order to get Donald Trump out of office, but that was only because you idiots stuck us with him the first time in the first place, and then we had a disaster because of COVID. So COVID is actually an important piece of this puzzle when it comes to Dave Smith and his overall opinion on politics and how he arrived at supporting a guy like Trump. So I'll get to that in a second. But it already doesn't make sense to say voting is stupid and the whole thing is stupid anyway if you're then going to say that we would be better off if Kamala Harris was president. That means you yourself are saying you should have voted for Kamala Harris. You should have voted for Democrats because Democrats are generally better on war. So that's pretty common sense. And like I've said, their brand has gotten so bad, and Joe Biden allowed the genocide to happen so brazenly in front of everybody that it completely killed the idea that Democrats are even better on war, even though, point for point, they have gotten us in less wars. And Republicans now, with this war in Iran, Donald Trump's track history on Iran, and also George Bush, have by far gotten us into more of these conflicts, although presidents like Obama and Joe Biden are responsible for continuing them, failing to end them, and facilitating them, and in Joe Biden's case, arming one of the worst crimes of the 21st century in front of everybody, like I said. So they absolutely destroyed their brand on something that they should easily be able to lead on. But again, it might indicate something that now Trump has gone so far on the issue of war that it's becoming harder for people to even say, well, Kamala Harris would have still been worse, which I have consistently heard from different people on the right up till this point. So, you know, this new crop of Democrats that is coming up, you know, James Talarico just won against Jasmine Crockett in the Texas primary, and there's more primaries to be had in the next few months or so. And so those candidates really need to capitalize on this anti-war sentiment, because it is pervasive throughout the country, and it's the kind of thing that undergirds our culture, which by keeping your finger on the pulse of that, you're going to be able to actually shift the politics of the country back in a different direction, because you're speaking to things that people care about. But being able to do that credibly is the next issue, and that's where it gets weird when it comes to Trump, because to me it's like, why would anybody ever trust anything that Trump says? And that's the thing about Dave Smith and other conservatives like him, is they still think this is about what Trump said while he was running and what they thought Trump believed in. But that's where they're fundamentally misunderstanding Trump, because Trump, the whole point of the project of Trump is that he will just say whatever. He just says whatever the fuck. None of it means anything. And somewhere along the way, people forgot that, because even people on the right still knew that for a while. But for some reason, when Trump came around the second time, he was really able to sell people on this anti-war thing. And the fact that, like, he actually is motivated by, like, deeply held beliefs, or that, like, really wants to do certain things. And that's just not true about Trump. So in Trump, you have empowered a naked con man who literally is just going to give the Republican Party and other entities whatever they want so that he can enrich himself, because it's a little bit easier for him to do that on that side. He could still be corrupt and be a Democrat, but it's a little bit more aligned with what Republicans want. Republicans want less regulation, they want less government oversight, and they want people to be able to amass enormous amounts of wealth. So if you're going to side with those guys, you're going to continue to see those patterns, as well as continuing to see the patterns of warmongering, because that's what those donors and people who have those political beliefs benefit from the most. So if you're dumb enough to vote for Republicans because you're anti-war, is my point, then you're just like an absolute mark. And I think most people who would vote for Democrats because they're anti-war would also say, yeah, I've seen Democrats do a lot of warmongering and a lot of war crimes, frankly, in my time as well, but you know what? They're better on war than Republicans. And Dave Smith, during the election, would have fought tooth and nail against anybody making that case, and here he is admitting that he's wrong well over a year into a very destructive Donald Trump presidency. Once again, a guy who's been president before. We've seen him do all this same shit before. How many times have you woken up while Trump was president and everybody was talking about panicking at the idea that Trump was going to get us into a war with Iran because he killed Soleimani, because he decided to strike Iran on behalf of Israel 6 months ago? This happens over and over again, and people failed to see the entire time what Dave Smith is now pointing out, out that this is literally just Republican Party policy. This is what they've always wanted, and Donald Trump is a vehicle for that. Because why would he ever have been anything else? To believe that he would have purposely shifted away from that and dragged American policy away from that is to think that he actually believes in something. You're not going to do that unless you truly believe in it, because all the money is to be made with the lobbyists and the people who want this war and Miriam Adelson and whatever. So Democratic establishment is too close to that, frankly, and it's being chipped away at by some of these primaries that we are seeing. James Talarico has beaten Jasmine Crockett, who's not the most establishment candidate, to be fair, but she is the more establishment candidate in this race, and she has been beaten by Talarico, who ran a more populist campaign, and this sort of idea of like more compassionate governing and actually investing in things like education and healthcare, because he saw firsthand how people were sort of abandoned by the system when funds were taken away by the government. Now, he's not quite as critical of Israel or anti-war as we might like. He seems sympathetic to those positions. I think it's worthy of some skepticism on his part because of that, but there's no doubt that it's going to be an interesting race between him and the Republican running for that seat, even though it's still quite likely that that Republican is going to win. Talarico seems to be the candidate that they didn't want, because Talarico is the one that can communicate to this sort of Christian demographic in Texas and make the case that Republicans, what they're doing is unchristian, it's undemocratic, and that, again, the culture should shift in a more leftward direction. So making that case in Texas is going to be powerful, and I think, you know, it has a lot of potential. I don't know if Talarico is going to be able to pull out that seat, but I do think the message of getting away from what Donald Trump is doing is going to be enormously powerful throughout the country. So the question is, what is the vision for that? And that's where I think it's important to not listen to people like Dave Smith too much, because ultimately, like I said, on the cultural aspect, I think Dave Smith is the kind of guy who's pretty much wrong about everything. So while I think he does reflect a certain amount of people's beliefs on these issues, I think he articulates the way a lot of people feel, specifically on war, but also on other things like culture. I think once you get into his beliefs on culture, you essentially get into explicitly right-wing territory where Democrats are just going to find themselves ass out if they start trying to appeal to those type of voters, because those type of voters are probably not going to vote for Democrats in the first place, and you're just going to be alienating a larger base of people that you need to excite and have show up for you. So that was the miscalculation that Democrats made in 2024. And Dave Smith is a good example of this, actually, because he says right at the end there, he says, you know, these are the people who wanted you to get the jab, meaning get vaccinated when COVID happened. And he's actually referring to Ben Shapiro there, saying that that means Ben Shapiro's too far left, I suppose. But he's gesturing at something that he actually mentions a lot when he's talking about this, which is his belief in general that Democrats went too far on many cultural issues, and that is how they ended up sort of losing the country to Donald Trump. So that's a popular opinion. However, you got to be very careful of what people tie into that general idea of Democrats going too far, because there are some people out there who will tell you that Democrats went too far left in general, and that's essentially what Dave Smith is saying. Although that doesn't make sense, because in whatever people consider the Democratic Party going too far left, there's simply no room for economics, there's no room for workers' rights, or any meaningful liberation or expansion of the franchise within that. So what they're talking about is these culture war issues that they've been convinced are important by right-wing propagandists. So those are the same empty right-wing propagandist shills that have gotten into power and done exactly what they told you guys they were a complete departure from. The guys who articulated exactly what you're talking about, not just with COVID and the vaccine and the shutdowns, but then it gets into trans people and DEI and all of this. You can tie all of that into the amalgam that they consider to be Democrats and Democrats going too far. And the only reason I'm tying all that stuff together is because this is specifically stuff Dave Smith talks about and has talked about in relation to the idea of how could you let a warmonger like Donald Trump look better next to you. That's the case he's made in talking about this specifically. And so, I mean, just to take the issue of vaccines, for example, this is a person who, in his libertarian wisdom, is just against the idea of public health. The idea that there would be a vaccination response to COVID at all genuinely bothers a lot of people, and they consider that a cultural win and something that they were always right about when it comes to Democrats, and it made Democrats so bad, so noxious, that the idea of voting for them was horrific. So that's where you just cannot listen to a person who believes that. And I think that the main issue with America's response to COVID, first of all, the initial impact happened while Donald Trump was president. So the entire strategy of the response to COVID up to the point that we were rolling out the vaccine happened under Donald Trump. And I believe that the scattered and completely misinformed way that America went about dealing with COVID, because Donald Trump was listening to the faction of the right that is saying what Dave Smith is still saying, essentially hampered the entire world's response to COVID. In other words, if there was a more coordinated response across the world, and if America's government was like better at instituting some of these solutions in a way that was less disruptive, where there could have been continued flow of commerce in certain directions, some industries would have still gotten knocked out. But essentially, I think that the protracted response that we saw was because America as a government and as a people couldn't get our shit together in terms of a collective public response to this. The nations that had a tight public response to COVID were able to effectively eradicate it. But guess what? It ended up coming back because that same virus was still mutating in places like America, where we never even got close to eradicating it because we were never doing the actual precautions that would have needed to be done to kill the virus. So these are the same people who want to take away the vaccines for things like measles, which is leading to a revival in measles outbreaks, which is leading to people being killed. So did Democrats lose the cultural battle on that with some key demographics that ended up deciding the election? Yes, they did. Does that mean they can capitulate on that issue? No, absolutely not. And what Democrats need to do is articulate a vision for how governance can work that is going to take the conversation in a different direction on that. And it's very important on this issue of war, actually, because the average person perceives that their tax money comes out of their pocket and then it goes to bombing kids in Gaza or bombing Iran on behalf of Israel. The average person, you ask them what they think of paying taxes, they're going to say something about that. And the general impression with Democrats is that they might try to allocate tax money towards other things or say that's what they're doing, but it never ends up happening that way. So this wave, and there is an opportunity for a wave of new politicians to be swept into the Democratic Party to knock at least some of these dinosaur Democrats out of the way, that are going to say, okay, we are going to take tax money from the billionaires. We are going to try to get it out of politics and out of elections, and we are going to allocate people's tax money towards keeping as stable and as sensible as a society going as possible. And that means that if you lift people out of poverty and you do what is necessary to provide resources on a broad basis that work efficiently but also are available to everyone, then what you do is you raise the general standard of living in your society. So if everybody has access to healthcare and nobody is struggling in those ways, people aren't going to fall into poverty for that reason, and the general standard of living amongst everybody's going to be better. Are billionaires and their net worth going to have to suffer for it? Yeah, they are. But it's okay. There's enough wealth there that some redistribution needs to happen. And this is possible to articulate to people because we tried the Trump way. And this left populism is kind of the only option left standing that we haven't tried in a while. And at least in the case of Zohran Mamdani and some of these more exciting Democratic candidates, you're starting to see like, oh, maybe there's some implementation here that can work. And there's many pitfalls, and they're going to use stuff like, oh, this idea of fraud in Minnesota and immigrants, blah, blah, blah. They're going to use that as much as they can to try to cut against this idea that we should invest in any public infrastructure, any type of programs. So Democrats and candidates, to the left of Democrats or whatever, that are going to articulate the case that we have enough money and how it can be spent to actually improve all of our lives by improving the lives of individuals where we can. That is going to be, I think, the message that starts to pull people away from Donald Trump. And the upside of where we are right now is that they've left no option on the table other than that. We've tried the neoliberal thing, we tried the neoconservative thing, we tried the neo-fascist Trump nationalist thing. And so now the only option left is left populism. And I think people are going to be more and more open to it as time goes on. And so if we focus on that as a cultural beacon and not the type of cultural touch points that got Trump elected, that's how we're going to be able to like create something more sustainable, because their bullshit is falling apart.
Me too close to, too much to do. The mission is too crucial. Shout it out from the rooftops until I lose vocals. Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity.